Hello, and welcome to 100% Real with Ruby. Today, I have part two of my podcast with Luke, and this time we're going into just how powerful protein is and how sometimes more is actually better and the benefits. And we also talk about carbs and fats a little, and hopefully, you get something valuable out of this.
I'm like Switzerland. I know what works for me really fast. I can transform my body really quickly because I've done it. You coach yourself for a long time, you get a good idea of that. But for me, really high protein, um, low to moderate carb, and low to moderate fat works really well for me. So for me, it's more of like a high protein, low energy diet when I'm wanting to lean out. So I prioritize protein and veggies, and then my carbohydrates are fairly low. Now, when you look at people who are really overweight, well, let me go back to that. But when I get really lean, like once I start getting to like single digit body fat, if anybody who's been a single digit body fat knows that you're never going to be satisfied. You're always going to be hungry. There's nothing you can do about it. But what we find is that adding carbs to that once you're lean has a much higher effect on keeping you satiated for a longer period of time. So I might make a case where if I was 24% body fat, I would probably higher protein, very low carb, moderate amounts of fat, and maybe more of a ketogenic or like ketogenic or keto type, because keto is a whole nother bag of worms that we could talk about that people don't understand, especially when you look at attaching keto to training. But with some people who are super overweight, yeah, I may utilize more of a ketogenic style diet. Not necessarily saying I'm putting them in ketosis, but if you're dieting, you're making ketones anyway, so it's a moot point. But
I think a lot of people that are listening to this as well, though, because if you listen to the episode with Alan, you'll hear a little rant on keto. But a lot of people listening to this, they take that approach and then they develop more disordered relationships with food because they don't understand what it is. They just cut out everything, eat more fats. And because I have a few ex-ketoers that have come to me that are now, they feel like lost causes. So for the majority of people, unless you have a coach, don't even consider it.
Well, the thing is, I think it's more surrounding education and the guru shit. It's like it has less to do with the way you're eating and more with your internal belief of what it's doing for you. And that's where commercialism has screwed up all the different types of diets, right? So it's like if you're like drinking bulletproof coffee and you're biohacking and you think this is the way to go, and yeah, that it's going to be difficult to pull someone out of that when it's time when keto is probably not the right thing for them, because keto can be good for a lot of different things. It could be a lifestyle thing because you feel better on it. Your brain works better for your certain physiology with a higher level of ketones. You could be using it as you're overweight and using it as a way to control appetite, because it does seem to control appetite really well in a lot of people. But people look at it as like it's magical. Like there's no magical way of doing this. The magic is in the protein. That's the magic. So
but the rat keto doesn't actually have a high amount of protein, which is the thing. Like people.
No. But this is the misconception. That's coming from people who are looking at standard ketogenic dieting that you would give somebody if they were epileptic. You're giving 20% protein and 80% fat. I'm going to tell you right now, there are other ways of doing keto other than that. And I've done, I don't want to say my own research, but I have.
The athletic ketogenic diet, but the people listening to this don't know the differences. That's what
I know.
That's what I'm trying
to we'll roll into that. It's like when you look at a diet, okay, let's say we've got 10 diets here, and if you don't train, they all pretty much work. Like you're looking at all these things and you're saying, okay, this works this way, this works this way, this way. They all have their own inherent way that they work. The minute you add training into it, that changes a lot of things, right? So if you look at a ketogenic diet as being super low carb, like say Atkins, like an induction phase of 20 grams of carbs until you start making ketones, and then you start slowly raising your carbs over time until you get out of ketosis and you bring it back down, and there's super high fat, super low protein. That diet was made for people who are massively obese. those people aren't training. You know, they're not going to be training may even hurt. Like they may go, I don't go to the gym because exercise hurts. I'm like, okay, well, until exercise doesn't hurt, you're probably not going to do anything other than maybe walking. So, you know, in a situation like that, where somebody's not going to train and they don't need that much protein, it works. You see people lose massive amounts of weight. And this is where you look at, you know, people that are anti-keto and they throw literature that supports their bias, but then you look at hundreds of thousands of people who have actually lost weight and sustained massive amounts of weight, like half their body weight, 150 kilos, 200 kilos, using that, and it works. So we have to look at things, say everything's in context, it all works. There's no best diet. You just have to find the one that you can live on for the rest of your life, or one that can be modified. It's a fundamental foundational diet that you modify. But when you look at training, it modifies everything. If you're doing weight training, so let's say you're burning off, like say I'm 100 kilos, not quite 100 kilos anymore, but let's say you take a 100-kilo guy in a weight training session. If you look at the metabolic equivalent, so if you do a pretty brutal 24, 30 set, a bodybuilding-ish type pump up, kissing your biceps type of thing in the gym, your energy output for that hour is going to be about 350 calories, okay? Because you're looking at metabolic equivalents.
Let's talk as a female who doesn't
same thing.
Intensity.
Well, same thing. So let's say you're 54 kilos, and we can estimate it to be somewhere around, you're probably burning off maybe 189 calories. But you got to look at it too. Those metabolic equivalents, they're taking into account one metabolic equivalent that you would already be burning off just by being awake. So you'd be burnt 54 kilos of that, because when people say training doesn't really burn off that many calories, it doesn't. But when you add the calories to what you would be burning off that hour, okay, that inflates it a little bit. So a 54-kilo woman, one metabolic equivalent per hour. So you'd be like, that'd be 54 calories just to sustain your bodily processes. And then another 2.5 would be equated to your workout. So you'd be burning off about 135 calories with a pretty good bodybuilder-ish workout, right? Plus that 54. So that's about 190 calories, 180 calories for that hour. Now, if you look at what you're doing, let's say you're doing mostly glycolytic work and you're burning off a lot of carbohydrates, you're doing like really moderate high intensity, steady state cardio or sprints, you know, a good majority of what you're burning off is going to be carbohydrates. So let's say that 180, and I'm just going to throw a number out. Let's just say the training you're doing is burning about 70% of that as carbohydrates per hour. Okay. So that would be, yeah, you're burning off a good 30, maybe 30 or 40 grams of carbohydrates an hour. So if you look at the way a standard ketogenic diet is designed, they're designed without exercise. So if you look at like that induction phase of 20 grams of carbohydrates in an Atkins, you may actually be able to get away with 50 or 60 in your induction. You may be able to get away with 100, 110 grams of carbs and still being technically in ketosis if you measured your ketones on a ketometer. I remember experimenting with this, and I wanted to see how many carbs could I get away with and maintain ketosis. And a lot of it just is based on how much training you're willing to do. So I did higher protein. I think it was like 2.6, 2.7, maybe 2.8 grams of protein per kilogram of body weight. So I was eating like 280, 300 grams of protein. Was eating around 225 grams of carbohydrates, and I wasn't eating high fat, but I was training 2.5 to 3 hours a day with pretty high intense stuff like giant sets and all this, and I could still maintain between 1 to 1.5 millimoles of ketones. So, and that's measuring in the blood. So technically, when you look at that diet, you go, well, technically that's not keto. But if you look at, I'm making, you normally make under 0.5 millimoles of ketones. Now I'm making like 1.5, even 2. I am technically in ketosis.
I want to highlight this because this is really important, and this is why a lot of you guys listening to this aren't quote unquote qualified to do a keto diet because you don't even understand what it means. Like he's eating like 300 grams of protein, over 200 grams of carbs, and he's in quote unquote ketosis. So trying to mentally masturbate over this shit is only spinning your wheels more.
Yeah.
And on that note, it's quite funny. I got into a really long argument, which led to a post on how training burns fat. And I'm like, no, it burns calories. It actually predominantly uses carbs. And she's like, yeah, well, if I go in fasted, I'm burning fat. I'm like, well, fat is getting oxidized, but your body is still producing glucose to use as fuel. Like, it is your main fuel source. It's burning calories.
Well, I would actually, if I was the negotiator between you and that person, I would say you're actually both pretty right. It just depends, right? So like, it depends what you're doing. So if you get on a treadmill and you run
intense weights and hit, you were talking
but,
about.
If you're going really hard, that is predominantly going to be a lot of glycogen and a little bit of fat loss. So it just depends on what you're doing. So like if you're doing sets of 8 to 12 with close to your 8 to 12 rep max, that's going to be primarily stored ATP, phosphocreatine, and glycogen. But if you're doing like 25 rep sets, that becomes massively aerobic. And I think that's another misconception, that people think that all weightlifting is anaerobic. It's not. It depends how long the muscle is put under work. So if you did a set that took 4 or 5 minutes, it's going to start out being anaerobic, but by the time you get to the 4 or 5 minutes, it's going to be massively predominantly aerobic. But no one's gonna do that. Like you're talking about doing like giant sets, and you're talking about doing like a 4-minute leg press, like, because at that point the intensity is so low and the time is so long that you've now pushed over into an aerobic state. But for me, it's not a practical thing to be doing with people, when you should be lifting weights to build muscle and get stronger, and leaving the aerobic stuff for when you're doing aerobic conditioning, because you want to lower your blood pressure, blood glucose, and all the other stuff. But really quick on the satiety stuff, like keto for a lot of people can be really good. Also, moderate to high carb can be really good. So it just depends where you are. So I go from the first thing you got to ask somebody in your diet: what are you willing to do? What are you willing to not do? What are you willing to eat? What do you want to eat? What are you not willing to eat? Like for me, fish. I don't like fish. I don't like fishy fish. So if I'm working with a nutritionist, I'm going to tell them straight up, I'm not eating salmon. I know salmon is everybody's favorite. I'm not eating salmon. I'm not eating any fishy fish. I'll eat prawns. I'll eat crab. I'll eat fish that doesn't taste like fish. But I'm from Texas. I'm going to eat some red meat, and I'm going to eat a lot of chicken. So you have to be willing to talk to your client about what's negotiable and what's not. Like what will you do, what you won't do, because we've got to figure out something that fits in with your lifestyle and with your preferences. And then we've got to look at, have you dieted before? Yes. What did you feel better on? I felt better when I kept in a couple of 100 grams of carbs. Cool. We're going to start the diet with that. And we're going to take your, say, 225 grams of carbs. And now we're going to use that to create, let's say it's 250 grams of carbs that you feel best on. That's 1,000 calories. Your TDEE is 2,500. That means we have 1,500 calories left over. You're in a deficit, so we're going to take 500 out. What's the other 1,000 calories based on? Yeah, depending on your size, probably going to be mostly protein, a little bit of fat. Because I think you wanted me to talk about like how much fat is essential or not, and like how much you really need. People can go as long as you're eating essential fatty acids, like having a bit of fish or oily fish or fish oil. You don't realistically need tons of fat. So if you are a carbaholic and you do want high carbs, it's totally fine to take your fat down pretty low. Now, for health purposes, you probably want to look at a range of like 20 to 30% of your calories. So for me, I'll usually base that off of anywhere from like 0.5 to 1 gram per kilo of body weight. But sometimes you got to dig deeper to get it off. So sometimes you have to take people below that. The non-negotiable is the essential fatty acids, because that's the one thing your body can't make.
So
and
I want to start the fat thing.
Real quick, and just understand that if you are going to dig deep and take fat down to really low levels, there's a starting date and an end date, and that's for a very small period of time. So if I give like context to this, we might be talking about somebody that needs to bust over a plateau, and maybe they're eating lower carbohydrates, they're eating enough carbs to fuel their activity, and we don't want to bring the protein down, but we might be able to save a couple of 100 grams of calories by just dropping fat a little bit lower. But just understand that that's a plateau buster. Once you bust that plateau, we need to bring that fat back up a little bit. Or it might be somebody that's the last 4 weeks before they do a step on stage or they do a photo shoot. Sometimes we might have to take it down, but it's very small period of time that we would do that.
Yeah, I wanted to say on the fat intake as well, because there's this misconception that you need, like, every single person, every single woman needs 60 grams or 70 grams for their hormones. And it's like, no, that's not actually accurate. And I'm pretty sure it was Alan Aragon that first stated you can easily live with your fats at 0.6 grams per kilo.
Yeah, I think, yeah, you could, technically go below 0.5, maybe even the 0.33. The only problem is fat is flavor, so your food's not going to taste as good. And you could look at a hormonal part, but you can't, like you said with the macros, like we don't eat macros, we eat food. Like when we look at things like hormones, that's going to be mostly equated to stress, total calories, like total net calories after you've had calories in versus calories out. And it's not really going to be attributed as much to certain macronutrients as people think, because you'll have some people that say, don't go under 30% fat. Well, okay, if I don't want to go under 30% fat, what if I'm eating, my TDEE is usually around 3,200. Okay, that amount of fat is 107. But what if I'm dieting and I'm eating 2,000 calories? Now my 30% is 66. So am I supposed to eat 66 grams of fat, or am I supposed to eat 106? Because I've used the same percentage. So it's more realistic to do it as grams per kilogram, because you find a level fat intake that allows you to enjoy your food and gives you the best results and the best energy. So like for me, because I like for me, the most satiating thing I can do that doesn't allow me to binge is I eat a high protein, low energy diet. So I prioritize a protein and veg, and then I'll usually keep the fat. I'll keep the fat at 40 or 50, and I'm 95 kilos, because I want to save a little bit for my carbohydrates, because I eat more of a modified low carb diet. So it's not, you're looking at somewhere around like 20-25% of my calories from carbs. When I'm dieting, that's not a lot of carbs, but it is enough to give me energy to go to the gym and train. It's just too little for you to look like you're full of glycogen all the time. So you have to concede that you're going to look a little bit flat and a little bit soft most of the time until you refeed.
Yeah, and because we're pretty much leading into the macros and micros part of it, before we dig further into macros and micros and the magic of protein and how sometimes more is better, there's also the fact that you and I both agree that percentages for macros are the stupidest thing ever, because like you just said, you want to do grams per kilo, because what's going to happen, like as soon as you lose weight, you're going to drop your, it's just like, it's stupid. But before we go into that, I want to clarify that when Luke was talking about anorectic hormones, that usually means the loss of appetite. So anything that is anorectic means you're going to be fuller slash the hunger. So that would be, like you said, carbs with the insulin. But something that I feel is really important to talk about is the loss of appetite when you have been chronically dieting, and how that isn't a good thing. Whereas a lot of people hold up a trophy like, I don't have an appetite, and how that happens.
Yeah, look, I in a lot of cases, if you are dieting, and because there's a lot of different things that could be going on here, but if you're dieting and you're not hungry, something's wrong. You're probably not eating as little as you think you are. But you can have people that are really, if they have a lot of energy on their body, a lot of stored energy. I've got to use the political term for fat these days, but you have a lot of stored energy on your body. You may be hungry initially in a diet, but quite often, if you've got enough body fat, once you start upregulating more fat oxidizing enzymes, and especially if you layer on top of that getting improper nutrition, like you're getting plenty of micronutrients, you're getting your essential fatty acids, maybe you're taking a multivitamin, multimineral. In a lot of cases, you can balance out that hunger because you're I don't want to say, it sounds so weird to say, like on a cellular level, like on paper, you might be in a deficit, but your body's making up that deficit with stored energy. So if you've equalized that, then you're losing weight, but you might not be hungry just for the fact that you're ripping off so much body fat so quickly that you just don't have the desire to be hungry. So that can happen. So you might go from this, you might have this transition period where you're hungry for a few weeks, and then all of a sudden your body figures out how to balance out what that deficit on paper with what you're actually giving to the cells. And then when you get really lean again, or when you start getting really lean, then you'll start getting hungry again because you don't have as much fat to lose, right? So, but you can get people, depending on how their brains are wired. Sometimes people are stress eaters. Sometimes they're stress dieters or non-eaters. It's like, I'm a stress non-eater. I could go all day. If I'm stressed out, I can go all day without eating, and then I end up binging at the end of the night. So you see all these weird patterns with people. But I would say, like, if you're not hungry in a diet, you're probably not dropping weight. But that doesn't mean, or body fat, that doesn't mean that's necessarily a bad thing, because if you let's say your TDEE is 2000 and you're eating 1500 on paper, but maybe you're actually eating like 2000, at least that's not the end of the world. Are you losing a lot of fat quickly? No, but at least you're building strength and muscle. And then as long as you're consistent, you can make your adjustments. Like, look at what you're eating. Is there a possibility I'm overeating, or I'm screwing up my measuring or whatever? But a lot of people, because I used to preach this, like, people shouldn't chronically diet, blah, blah, blah. And then, 10, 20 years later, I realized, like, the research on this is pretty good, that people massively underreport what they eat. And in a lot of cases, even coaches do it. But in a lot of cases, they're doing it a lot of times because they don't realize, they don't understand it enough to be able to be consistent. Or again, like, we go back to the labeling laws, they might be eating a lot of stuff out of boxes and just accidentally be over consuming energy and not even realizing it. So there's a lot of things. But I would say, if you've been chronically dieting and you're not losing, what you might consider doing is, let's go ahead and slowly raise the calories back up, and just see at what calories do you actually drop, or actually start to gain weight. So if I give you like another 200 calories, you go for a couple of weeks and you'll have weight change, another 200 calories, another 200 calories, and all of a sudden you start consistently gaining weight. Okay, at least now we know where we're over the line, and now we can bring it back down again.
I want to highlight that, like, it's over 2 weeks, because the acute change doesn't mean anything, because you have food volume, and then if you're increasing with carbs, there's also the glycogen and the water weight that goes with this. So you can't just rely on the scale and
the poop. People don't think about that, right? So especially if you look at people who have been dieting, you have less bulk, you have less feces, you're going to get less motility in the guts. Your guts are going to slow down digestion a little bit. They're going to slow down pushing poo out. So in a lot of cases, you're going to have a transition period where you add more food. Your brain has to go, okay, I actually have more food now. I need to push this shit out. So you may have a jump, but you want to, if you jump, it's okay. Just make sure you stabilize and then add a little bit more.
This is actually taking me back to when I first started with you 3 years ago. I was on like 16 or 1700 calories, and as soon as we increased my calories to, you jumped me up straight away to 300, because I wouldn't be game enough to do the 25 you wanted me on. But my weight went up 1 kilo, and I freaked the fuck out. And I remember that. But it's like it stayed there for a little bit, but my body was actually, like, I wasn't gaining any more than that 1 kilo on like 700 calories more, pretty much.
And that's why the scale is not, scale is important. It's important. Like, I like people to monitor their weight daily. It's important, but it's not the most important thing. Like, it's not the only thing. You need to have, You need to layer in levels of things that you look at. How do I look? What do my pictures look like? What's my scale? What are my circumference measurements? There's a lot of different things you could take, because the more data that you have, the more the less fuzzy the picture looks, right? So if you're still just using the scale to dictate your body composition, that's like you're still using a Nokia flip phone, right? When you start adding in circumference measures, technology and pictures and all the other stuff, now it's like going to like an iPhone 21 or something. Everything's more clear, and you have a better position to actually assess what's happening and whether we're moving in the right direction or not. That because most guys, again, most guys, when they want to gain muscle, they'll use the scale. So if they're not gaining weight, they'll just eat more and eat more and eat more. And then one day, people start commenting on how good they look in their clothes. And one day they step out of the shower and they go, oh, fuck, I took the bulk too far. And then they starve it off. Women do the other thing. If they're not losing weight, they freaking the fuck out. And look, here's a big thing too, like for new clients. If you have a lot of women, if we think about what the difference between what traditionally, these days it's getting better, but traditionally, like when I first got in the industry, most guys, they'd want to change their bodies. They want to look like Arnold Schwarzenegger. They'd start lifting weights. They'd gain a little bit of weight almost immediately. They'd slow down. They'd eat more food. They'd gain more weight. They'd eat more food. So that's what they would do. So, and then they go through these cycles of getting overly fat when they did their bulk, which is not necessary, and then over dieting and just spinning their wheels for years until they realize, like, I should probably not take the bulk as extreme or the diet as extreme if I want to change my body long term. Women do the opposite traditionally. Like when I got in the industry, you go in the gym, there was all dudes and maybe 3 or 4 chicks in the whole gym. And the 3 or 4 chicks were women who competed in bodybuilding. So you didn't see the amount of women training in gyms that you see now 20 something years ago, because women, they were all running. They would do running, or they would go to their classes. They go to Zoom, like the yoga classes, or they do step aerobics, like Jane Fonda shit. And then they would just starve themselves. So men will inherently use the scale as their only metric of I'm gaining muscle mass. And women will use the scale as I'm losing body fat. While the scale is important, there are other things we need to layer in there as well, because if you're taking your bulk too far and you're getting fat, you're adding an unacceptable level of fat to muscle ratio. That's not good. If you're dieting and you're losing an unacceptable ratio of muscle to fat, that's also not a good thing. So we need to be more realistic about what's happening and have better ways of measuring and assessing this stuff and having clients understand that.
Yeah, and we'll talk about this later, but you really don't need to be in that big of a surplus to build muscle. But I want to quickly revisit that really important thing you said about having stored energy and how the body has its homeostasis chemical processes going on. You are always somehow storing and liberating, burning fat, but it's the net balance over time that determines the outcome. Your body is always storing and liberating carbs. It's always doing these processes where, okay, you are actually storing fat every single day, but you're also liberating it and burning it. So maybe you can quickly touch on that before we go into macros.
Yeah. So I think it's probably important to think about why we have storage sites for these things, because when you look at it, like you look at a fat cell, people go, oh, that's a storage site for energy. Yes and no. It's actually, I like to think about it as a garbage can, right? Because if you look at what happens in the bloodstream, if you have an excessive amount of sugar in the bloodstream, what happens? You could go in a coma, you could die. Just look at diabetics. I had a cousin who had diabetes, had no idea. He was 30 something years old. He passed out. Somebody found him on the street, went to the hospital. He had, what was the number? I can tell you millimoles. He had a blood sugar of, what's the conversion? It was something astronomical, like, but I can't remember off the top of my head the conversion. It was astronomical, like for Standard International, something like in the 20s or 30s or 40s. It was basically in the freedom units in America, it was 800 was his blood sugar. So I can't think off the top of my head what the conversion is for that right now, but it was a lot. It was a lot. It was a diabetic. It could have killed him, right? So if you have too much energy in the bloodstream, it can kill you. If you have too little energy in the bloodstream, it can kill you. So this is why, like when you look at, if we go back to the keto thing, why if you have someone who's a diabetic, a ketogenic or carnivore diet can be really good if they're working with a doctor and a dietitian who knows what they're doing, because it can massively lower how much insulin they need to pop in to keep their blood sugar stable. So I've got a friend who he's a type 1 diabetic. And when I was training him a long time ago, he talked to me about doing ketogenic or carnivore. And I said, look, you could. I said, it can be dangerous. So I can't tell you what to do. You just need to find a doctor who understands this and understands how to regulate this with diabetes. He's been eating like that for like 4 or 5 years. Lowest amount of insulin he's ever had to use was insulin pump. He's shredded all the time. His muscles are huge now compared to what they used to be. But the problem is that if you look at a diabetic and you go on a ketogenic diet, ketones are a form of energy, glucose is a form of energy, and the fat is a form of energy. The problem happens when your liver's outpouring too much glucose and you have too many ketones. It's not really the ketones, the glucose, or the fat. It's the amount of available energy in the bloodstream that can kill you. So we have to have a way to get rid of that. So we either take those types of things and put them in the muscle to either store or burn off, or we take those things and we combine them together and we put them into fat cells. So in a lot of cases, fat cells aren't just a store site for energy. You can also think about it as a garbage can. If you have too many, anything can be toxic levels of energy. You could have toxic things from the environment, toxic things, whatever. But your body has a nice depot of that where it can take that out of bloodstream and slam it into the fat cell to basically keep it from killing you. So you're constantly removing these things. You're constantly breaking down and putting them back in the bloodstream. So I think one of the big misconceptions with Gen Pop is they take fat burners and they think these fat burners are burning fat. Okay. While this is true, it's probably not burning as much as you think. So you have a couple of concepts here. You have fat oxidation, where you're actually taking fat, or also glucose oxidation, where you're taking glucose and you're turning this into energy, or not really turning it, but recycling your energy. So making ATP, like little batteries that run your enzymes, or you can take it and you make body heat out of it. There's a lot of different things, but whatever you can't, oxidize, you're going to store, because you have to keep it somewhere to neutralize the toxic effects of it that can happen if it stays in your bloodstream. So a lot of the fat burners on the market are primarily fat mobilizers, not fat oxidizers. Now, there are things in combination that can. If you look at like caffeine, aspirin, and ephedrine stack that we used to use back in the day, it does have a big boost in metabolism. If you combine all three of those together, you could boost your metabolism 6 to 10%. So
it's actually illegal, just so you guys know, so don't think you're going to get your hands on it.
It's illegal in Australia because Australia, the government doesn't let us have any fun. But it's not illegal in Canada. It's also not illegal in America. But it's massively beneficial. You talk about something that works super well as an anorectic for people. Oh man, the ECA stack, it works, I reckon, as good, if not better, than most of the anorectic drugs on the market, without nasty ass side effects. But if you look, I remember 20 years ago, I think they still do that here. They give Adipex, they give phentermine, and it's basically you're giving people an amphetamine to control their appetite. So they keep things that are natural, like keeping ephedrine off the market, so they can sell you more phentermine or whatever doctors are selling at that time. But phentermine has nasty side effects.
I was gonna say, can you guys hear what he's trying to say though? Everything here is a means to reduce your appetite so you eat less. It is not a magic thing. And if you're still going to get yourself into a surplus, none of this shit is gonna work.
That's it. You just gotta eat less. If you don't think you can lose weight, I tell you what, eat 500 calories a day and only protein, and do that for like Do that, take a multivitamin, drink a lot of water, and do that for 8 weeks. You'll lose weight. Of course, your body won't look that great because you'll lose a lot of muscle, but it will prove a point that you can lose weight.
Which is proving the point that you wanted to make this thing about, building an amazing physique. Fat loss isn't weight loss, and weight loss isn't building an impressive physique.
Yeah. I mean, look, like if you look at kind of your transformation, you didn't lose any weight. You actually gained weight, but your body looks completely different, you know? So it's like, do you really want weight loss, or do you want your body to look different? Right? So those are two massively different things. But like going back to what we were talking about before, so one of the main things that creates the fat breakdown, so you have triglycerides. So you take a little bit of glycerol and you take some fatty acids, you bond them together, you esterify them, and you put them in a fat cell, and they kind of sit there waiting to be needed. And so in a normal metabolism, you trickle out a little bit of energy as needed, you put a lot back in. The more stressed out you get, the breakdown of this, if you look in biochemistry, when you look at lysis, L-Y-S-I-S, if that's at the end of a word, that means that something's breaking down. So lipolysis is breakdowns of lipids. So hormone sensitive lipase, which is an enzyme that is specifically stimulated through epinephrine or adrenaline. That's what stimulates the deesterification of triglycerides into fatty acids pushed in your bloodstream. So if you're chronically stressed out all day, which happens if you're chronically dieting, or you don't get a lot of sleep, if you work too much, if you have toxic relationships, your adrenaline's going to go sky high. That's going to cause a massive breakdown of this. You're going to push a lot more into the bloodstream than you can get back into the fat cell. And then this leads to a host of other metabolic consequences like metabolic syndrome and insulin resistance and glucose desensitization. There's a lot of stuff that can happen. And again, what we talked about earlier, like from my perspective, it's a lot of complex shit, but what I'm giving to the client, we're never talking about this. It's all like watered down greatly because they only need to know what to do. They don't need to know all the nuances of how this shit works.
Which is why it's so freaking important to actually get a coach.
Yeah. Well, and look, and at the end of the day, if you're taking a lot of these fat burners, again, they increase fat oxidation? Yes. Is that a good thing? Yes. But you could also do that by just, doing a little bit more activity and maybe eating a tiny bit less or training a bit harder to get a little bit more output up. But there is a consequence to this. If you take people who are already stressed out and beasting life and you throw in a bunch of stimulants on top of that, you're going to put them in a situation where they're pushing way more energy in the bloodstream than they can get into the fat cell, and they're going to overwhelm their ability to turn that into energy. So in a lot of cases, that can backfire, especially if you have people who take stimulants early in the morning and then end up binging at night, because you create this almost seesaw teeter-totter thing where they're moving from this state where they're breaking a lot of things down. You're trying to throw them back here, and so now you're overeating, and so you end up binging more and more and more because you're trying to compensate for all the stuff you're doing earlier in the day. So
yeah, your body's trying to maintain a balance, and your blood sugar and your insulin management is a reflection of that, which kind of leaks into, we'll leave protein as the last macro we talk about, but this kind of highlights how carbs aren't the issue. It's insulin, but insulin isn't just managed via your carb intake.
Well, and the thing is, carbs aren't the problem. Insulin's not the problem. Fast's not the problem. Cortisol is not the problem. Adrenaline is not the problem. It's everything. And again, it's a matrix of shit that clients don't need to know about. They just need to understand like this. I always just tell them, I'm like, it's complicated. It's complicated. I can explain it to you if you want, but I just need you to know what to do and be consistent at doing that. That's the most important thing. But it's like your body wants to stay at homeostasis. If you want to change one direction to the other, you have to make it imbalanced, but you can't get to the point where you're teetering imbalanced too much. So like everything's situational. You have to learn a lot of context, right? So if I have someone who just wants to lose 20 kilos in 8 weeks, we can do that. But the consequence is you're going to lose some muscle tissue. You're going to be miserable. You might develop a disordered eating pattern. Your sleep's going to get disrupted. Your libido is going to go to shit. Your hormones are going to go to shit. If I have an athlete that's like, a coach comes to me and says, my athlete, I want her to get, I want her to drop 15 kilos so she runs faster. I'm like, how fast do you want this? Because if I do this really fast, she's going to lose power output. So even though she weighs less, she's also going to be slower. So we gotta look at that and say, we can't do extreme stuff to do this. We have to do it in a way that fits into the environment and the context and the situation that we're dealing with. If you had somebody who was really overweight and they had to do something like, let's say an astronaut, you got an astronaut. I'm just going to throw out the weirdest thing I can think of. You got an astronaut and NASA calls you and says, look, this person needs to lose 15 kilos, 20 kilos in 6 weeks. Can you do it? Yes. At that point, the situation dictates that it has to be extreme because we've got a very narrow time limit and this guy's being sent to Mars or whatever, they're sent to Uranus, whatever. At that point, like, we can justify doing something extreme and we can justify the consequences. But for the rest of our clients, you can't. Like, it doesn't make sense to go through these patterns of high and low and spinning your wheels, trying to do extreme things to make things run faster than they should be run.
Especially because the way that I see a lot of people doing it is that they think that you can build substantial amounts of muscle in a month or 2 months. So they go through a building phase for 4 weeks, maybe 8 weeks. Oh, I'm getting a little fluffy. I need to go into a fat loss phase. And they don't actually build any substantial muscle mass. They just keep looking worse and worse year after year.
Yeah. The funny thing is, this is actually a really easy fix. It's a super easy fix. So let's say you go into a building phase and you're eating 2,500 calories and you're gaining, but then all of a sudden you notice, say after 8 weeks, you start to soften up. Don't jump into a fat loss phase. Just take 100 calories out and see how you respond. And if you haven't responded the way you want in a week or two, take another 100 calories out, because you may just be eating 10% more than you actually need to build muscle. So now you're putting on some fat. That's cool. Chip away and only remove the amount of calories you need to tidy yourself up a little bit. Because in a lot of cases, especially with 8 weeks, a lot of that is just water retention. It's just water retention from training is an inflammatory process. Eating excess amounts of food is an inflammatory process. Inflammation makes you hold water, especially water in the skin. So in a lot of cases, if you go into a surplus, you have to look at it as, am I actually really gaining fat, or am I just a little bit bloated from the food? Am I just holding a little bit more water because I have more water on board? I have more sodium on board. If you just chip a little bit of the calories out, take a look at your sodium to potassium ratio, you might even see that, okay, this is actually just some water retention and a little bit of poo in my stomach. So you have a big poo, chip away a couple hundred calories, and you start finding a good position of the optimal calories to keep growing without holding tons of water and without putting on gobs of fat, but I'm still getting stronger and I'm still growing. Same thing with the dieting. If you put yourself in a 500 calorie deficit, it's not working. Don't take another 500 calories away. Just take off 100 calories at a time. Take 100 calories a week until you see the scale moving and your body transforming the way you want to. Stop doing extreme shit, because if you do extreme shit, it's like taking a shotgun approach. You never know what worked. You might have taken 1,000 calories away when you only really needed to take away 550. Like, why would you not want to eat that other 450 if you didn't need to pull that out? It doesn't make any sense.
Because people keep trying to get results yesterday, and it's like, no.
Yeah.
But then also the fact that your body does need to feel safe, and it's a long-term process. And if you're chopping and changing, it doesn't know what the fuck it's gonna do.
Yeah. Well, and look, if you want, I'm just gonna say it, and that again, you're gonna have to say, keep in mind, guys, this is illegal. If you want it faster, pull your big boy panties on and do steroids. Because if you're not willing to do that, just accept that it's going to take a long time to build appreciable amount of muscle, and there's nothing wrong with that. And I'm a big believer that if anybody's going to take performance enhancing drugs, you need to spend, I would tell people, spend at least a decade, see what you're capable of naturally. Then if that's not enough, then jump on it. But Pete, there's shortcuts also have consequences. So if you do the PED route, you got the consequence of A, it's illegal. B, you don't know if you're getting what you're getting is what you're getting. There are health consequences. You know, you look at TRT. TRT is pretty benign, but when you start jumping into, you know, no young man ever does TRT. They go straight to like the highest amount of shit you can do, and then they wonder why their blood pressure's screwed up. Their nose is bleeding every time they fart. You know, why their dingling doesn't work, and you know, women have to join the Dollar Shave Club because they're having to shave their back. You know, it's like that's, if you want to speed it up, that's how you do it. But you have to be willing to accept the consequences, the legal and physiological consequences.
Yeah. And people who aren't, it's almost like if you're not focusing so much on fat loss, you get too lax and too flexible outside of that. So it might not be the fact that your surplus is wrong. It's just your mindset and how you're approaching it is actually what's wrong. But we'll talk about that later. Because
here's a good one. It's like okay, you want something that will definitely make you lose weight. Start doing meth. Would you do that? No. Okay, then let's not do extreme things. Let's just do it the right way. And because if you really wanted to lose weight really fast, and your job and your teeth and your relationships, your children, just do meth. Like, people would say that's crazy. I'm like, okay, but that's what I'm talking about. We don't need extreme shit. That's really extreme. The way a lot of people diet these days, and all that, it's really fucking extreme. And they go, like you said, extreme highs and lows, swinging back and forth, where
why they can't actually see the results they want and why they're at the same square one January 1st every year.
Well, yeah, and the thing is, with the physiological process, if you're swinging back and forth a lot, our bodies are designed to not want to spend money on things we don't need. Okay, so if you, like, going back to the keto thing, if you go on a ketogenic diet, if you do that for a significant period of time, you're going to have a hard time utilizing carbs once you start eating carbs again, because there are certain enzymes that are carb specific that your body doesn't feel like it needs to make, like pyruvate dehydrogenase. So you're going to have,
is something that is used for carbs, so you guys know.
Yeah, and so, like, especially for athletes, if you have an athlete that's going really low carb and they go into season and they start pumping their carbs up, there's going to be a transition period where the brain goes, oh, okay, we have ample amounts of carbs coming in, we need to upregulate these enzymes. Same thing with fat oxidation. Like, let's take insulin out of the picture. Let's take and just sugar by itself out of the picture. If you eat, lots of carbohydrates and eat low fat, things specific to oxidizing fat, they're going to go down. Things specific to oxidizing carbs are going to go up. That's great for an athlete. But if you go from a high carb diet and you go extreme to a low carb high fat diet, and you go right back to a high carb low fat, back and forth, if you're doing this in like really small periods of time, your body's getting used to one diet, and then you extremely flip to another diet. It has to start catching up to the new diet and the new macros because it has to make the enzymes.
Yeah. And this is why it's so freaking important to take the long approach. But something that we've been dying to talk about on this is why protein intake is so important, and how more can actually be better for many people.
Okay, so yeah, so look, if you look again, we'll go into a couple of different viewpoints when you look at the research. Let's start at the recommended daily allowance, which is just pathetic. You brought that up over offline. Recommended daily allowance, what is that for? So it's basically the minimal amount of a certain nutrient that keeps the majority of the population out of some type of nutrient deficiency issue. So like if there's a recommended daily allowance of vitamin C, so you don't get scurvy, right? There's a RDA level for vitamin D, so you don't get rickets, right? And there's a lot of things that most first world country people, unless they're homeless, these are things that we don't deal with anymore, right? But yeah, protein has its own RDA, because out of all the macronutrients, protein, you have to have protein. Like you can't not have protein because your body can't make protein. So you ingest amino acids from your protein. Your body breaks the protein down. It breaks it down into amino acids and peptides, and then it uses those amino acids and those peptides to create other things, not just muscle, but also hormones and enzymes and everything else. It also to feed things like your immune system. And to fuel liver detoxification, right? So we won't get like David Avocado Wolf hippie foo-foo, but yeah, liver detoxification, you have to have the right things. You have to have certain amino acids to get stuff out of your body. That doesn't mean go buy yourself a box of detox shit at your local health store. That just means like if I get ample amounts of protein in, that will increase the ability for me to get things out of my body that my body's trying to get out. It keeps your immune system happy, especially in the gut. It does build muscle. You also oxidize some protein. So in a mixed macronutrient state, you oxidize roughly about 5 to 10% of your protein. Now, when you increase your protein and you decrease carbohydrates to a sub-maximal level, meaning you're going to be a little bit glycogen depleted or even a lot of glycogen depleted because you're burning that off with your exercise and you're bringing in like maybe say a moderate amount. When you have low amounts of glycogen, your body will start oxidizing protein at a higher rate. So that number will move up to like 10 to 15%. So I've got this concept of caloric funnels. You can create caloric funnels that allow you to eat more without having to diet so hard. So thermic effect of food. When you eat protein, about 25 to 30% of that is going to just those calories, that energy is going to be used to basically process the protein. So if I look at fat, it's negligible. It's like point nothing, right? Carbohydrates is somewhere around 10 to 12%. So if I'm on let's say a mixed caloric diet, let's say I'm something like say a 40, 30, 30, something like that. Oh, zone-based diet. If I take that fat and I pull 10% of that off and I replace that with protein, I'm actually going to lose around 25% of those calories just by switching from one macro to another. If I take some of those carbohydrates and take those out and replace those with protein, I'm going to get about a 12% reduction in those calories from the thermic effect. And I've seen people talk about, it doesn't matter, it's not that much, but I disagree. I think if we look at a long-term goal, let's say that number was 100 calories a day. So let's say I made a switch and pulled some fat off and I replaced that with protein, and then that reduced my calories through thermic effect by 100. If I look at that, it's 365 days, and I divide that by theoretically in a kilo of body fat, there's about 7,700 calories. Now that's not entirely accurate, but it's good for looking at this, right? Because it's different for different people. But if we divide that by 7,700, that's almost 5 kilograms of weight loss over the course of a year, and you didn't pull any calories out. You just made a switch from one macro to another. So that's an easy hack, right?
I would also argue that 100 is a lot more for a woman than it is a man anyway.
Well, yeah, 100%. And if you look at most of the meat you're going to eat comes just from the animal. It's not like at least that's the way I would want people to do it. Like go buy your chicken, buy your steak, buy your tofu or whatever, and cook it yourself. Because most of my clients will do that. So at least the calories on the label are pretty accurate. So it gives you a bit more wiggle room. But then also, if I take some of those calories and I replace carbs with protein and I train hard, I'm going to be, if I think about my glycogen stores or my stores of sugar in the cells, if that gas tank is like partially empty and I'm keeping that gas tank a little bit low all the time, that's going to be possibly another 5 to 10% caloric output from those protein calories, because you're going to need to replace some of that carbohydrate. You replace some of that with protein, or you can also use protein to fuel energy production. I'm trying not to get too technical, but fuel energy production in the mitochondria, because you can take the carbon skeletons and shove them into some of the cycles in there. So these are just these little metabolic tricks you could use, where you might have somebody. A good example is that person that's in a surplus and they're getting a little sloppy and they don't like the way they look. Cool. Maybe you don't take any calories away. Maybe just take some of your fat, some of your carb, replace it with protein, and all of a sudden it creates a caloric funnel. But
I was going to say, protein, like this is why protein sometimes more can be better. And It's just that there's also so many people out there saying on the other side, just stick to 1.8 grams per kilo. Well, it's like, well, do you want to optimize your physique or just cruise through?
Yeah. Well, and I'll say it like this, like, because they're not wrong. But if you like, in a lot of these guys, again, it's going to be the evidence-based crowd, right? So they're looking at the literature, and the literature comes out, says when they've compared, say, 0.8 to 1.6, the people that ate 1.6 had a better body composition. They put on more muscle, they lost more body fat, they had more energy, they were able to control their appetite better. So there's a lot of benefits to that. But then the ISSN did some research going from going from that range to like 3.3 to 4.4, and they found an even better result there. Now, that's a big margin. If you look at, like, we'll say people who are training minimum 1.6 to 1.8, maximum that we know of now is like 4.4. That's a pretty wide margin. So the way I talk to clients about this, I'm like, look, number one, do you like to eat protein, right? What type of protein do you eat? If you're a vegan, then 3.3 to 4.4 is not going to be a great number for you, because if you're in a controlled calorie diet, you're going to have to be eating a lot of protein powders to keep the carbs and the fats down, if you're eating that much. If you're eating tasty animals, well, then it's a little bit easier, right? Because you've got options of like super low fat meats and stuff, and also whey protein powder and things like that. So, but is it necessary to go that high? Not really. I think it's going to be a factor of, can you afford that much protein? Do you actually want to eat that much protein? Does that much protein actually feel good to you? Because, like, I typically work on 2.8 to 3, sometimes 3.3 grams per kilogram of protein, but I like protein. I like steak. I like chicken. I like whey protein. I don't have a problem getting it, and I feel better when I eat that amount. So pumping up protein, is there a massive benefit? Yes. Is there a massive benefit to massively increasing your protein? There's limited research into it, but from what literature is that there possibly is a benefit to going even higher than, say, what bodybuilders would always look at, which is 2.2 grams per kilogram. Is that amount going to be? Is it going to give you enough advantage? High enough percentage of advantage over anything else? Maybe not. It just depends on how it works with you. But I can tell you, if you're gonna binge and cheat on anything, protein's the thing you want to binge and cheat on, because, again, it's satiating. It's very difficult to do that. No one's ever gotten fat overeating steak and broccoli. So if you're binging on that, you're probably going to be doing better off than if you pull out the peanut butter and jelly and start making peanut butter jelly sandwiches and chocolate milk, because that's far easier to consume more of than the former.
Yeah, it's all the other stuff you have on top of all of that that actually causes it. And with that, it's kind of the whole micro deficiencies can store fat loss and prevent muscle building. And a lot of people are even nutrient deficient, even when they're overeating. It's just worse if you're undereating.
Yeah. Well, yeah. And the thing is, like,